Tonight, a man charged with murder after two Israeli embassy staffers are gunned down in D.C.
She was as close to perfect as any human could be.
A young couple just starting their lives.
This attack was targeted anti-Semitic violence.
The suspect allegedly said he did it for Gaza. Fear over anti-Semitism as tensions between Israel and Canada rise. A last-minute meeting between Canada Post and its union.
We're already facing an existential crisis.
Can a work stoppage be averted? And the Trump administration blocks Harvard from enrolling any international students, leaving thousands in limbo.
It is heartbreaking. We are being used as poker chips.
The standoff between the White House and the Ivy League University.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrienne Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. There is shock and sorrow tonight in Washington after a fatal shooting outside a Jewish museum that investigators call targeted and anti-Semitic. Two employees of the Israeli embassy were killed by a man who allegedly told police he did it for Gaza. The staffers, a young couple who were due to get engaged in Israel next week. Now, a 31-year-old man from Chicago is charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors say they are investigating the killings as a hate crime and a possible act of terrorism. Now, Jewish communities in D.C. and beyond are understandably rattled by the violence. Katie Simpson is in Washington and shows us that fear and the anguish for the victims.
The well-worn rituals of grief. Mourners here say they are too familiar with. Clinging to one another steps from the crime scene, the overwhelming sense of loss gives way to anger.
And if you're not brokenhearted, you ought to be. How can we stand here like it's normal?
2 staffers at the Israeli embassy in Washington, a young couple, 30-year-old Yaron Lashinsky and 26-year-old Sarah Milgram, were gunned down as they left an event organized by a Jewish advocacy group at the Jewish Capitol Museum.
Make no mistake, this attack was targeted anti-Semitic violence, and it won't be tolerated.
We're going to continue to investigate this as a hate crime and a crime of terrorism, and we will add additional charges as the evidence warrants.
31-year-old Elias Rodriguez is charged with first-degree murder, murder of foreign officials, and several weapons charges.
We heard between 10 to 15 gunshots, roughly.
Witnesses say Rodriguez ran into the museum in the chaotic aftermath of the shooting and was inside for some 15 minutes before they say he confessed to police.
He said, "Sir, I'm unarmed." He put his hands up, he grabbed a red keffiyeh out of his pocket and started the Free Palestine chants.
The moment captured by stunned onlookers.
Free Palestine! If this is not a wake-up call to the world, then they have died for nothing.
Ayala Razin Bethor was friends with Milgram. They met through her work at the embassy.
She joined the embassy shortly after October 7th. After she felt the rise of the anti-Semitism, the same anti-Semitism that she struggled was the one that brought to the end of her life, that got her murdered.
The couple was to fly to Israel on Sunday. Lashinsky had plans to propose. Instead, their families are now planning their funerals.
She was as close to perfect as any human could be. And she was recently very much in love with Yaron.
Police are now searching through the suspect's electronic devices, his social media history, and trying to verify what they believe is a manifesto. He's from Chicago, and police say he flew to D.C. for a work conference. They're now tracing his steps through the city and trying to figure out the origins of the weapon.
Okay, so many questions. Katie, additional questions about security at the event.
Well, there weren't extra police at the museum because the event was small and it wasn't publicized. But this happened in what should be one of the safest places in Washington. It's a block from police headquarters, a couple of blocks from a major FBI building, and less than a kilometer from the U.S. Capitol.
All right, Katie Simpson in Washington tonight. Thank you. The Canadian government is condemning the murders in Washington and expressing concern about a rise in anti-Semitism. But as Ashley Burke reports, Ottawa's response did not ease tensions between Canada and Israel.
Do you have any updates to share, Minister?
Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister calls the killing of 2 staffers of the Israeli embassy in Washington both appalling and horrifying.
The rise in anti-Semitism is unacceptable, and it must stop.
The Prime Minister posting online, "This hate is intolerable, and I condemn it in its strongest terms." But ministers in Israel are trying to connect Canada and other countries to it.
There is a direct line connecting anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli incitement to this murder. This incitement is also done by leaders and officials of many countries.
Earlier this week, Canada, the UK, and France threatened action if Israel doesn't halt military operations in Gaza and allow in humanitarian aid. Israel's Prime Minister taking direct aim at all 3 leaders, including Mark Carney.
Now, these leaders may think that they're advancing peace. They're not. They're emboldening Hamas to continue fighting forever.
But others say Israel is just trying to scare off any more criticism.
To try and score political points over the death of 2 young people in Washington. I really find it almost despicable.
This all unfolding a day after Canada said Israeli Defense Forces fired shots in the vicinity of a large group of diplomats in the occupied West Bank. 4 members of a Canadian delegation, including one of its top-ranking officials, were there. Israel's Prime Minister called it an accident. Canada summoned his ambassador for answers.
When the choice of a new government is immediately to step out in the open and to come out with formal accusations and formal summons and so on, the response from Prime Minister Netanyahu is very clear, that this is not the way that we see it conducive not to the situation and not to the relations.
Canada, the UK, and France say they plan on joining other countries to recognize a Palestinian state at a UN conference next month about a 2-state solution. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Jews in Canada are reeling tonight, but while community leaders here are expressing anger, some say sadly they're not shocked. Vanessa Lee explains.
Outside of the Israeli consulate in Montreal, a vigil for Sarah Lee Milgram and Yaron Lashinsky.
We need to show the world we're there and we not like go away.
Police in Montreal, Ottawa, and Toronto say they are stepping up patrols around Jewish institutions as a precaution after Wednesday's shooting in Washington.
While we have not received any direct requests from community members to be out there, we have previously in the past. And in this particular circumstance, we've made the strategic decision to get our officers out there, show the colors, and make sure that the community knows that they can go about their day being safe.
In Canada's largest city, police say Jews were the target of nearly 40% of all hate crimes last year, even though they represent around 4% of the population. Members of the community say they don't need stats to know there has been a rise in anti-Semitism.
We see it when we walked into the event last night at Beth Tzedek Synagogue and we had to go through metal detectors. When we drop our kids at a Jewish day school or we visit a Jewish community center and there is police on duty outside the institution, private security hired to keep us safe.
I don't know any other community that has to spend $2.1 million on protecting its people.
The rabbi at this Vancouver synagogue that was the target of arson last year says this latest attack reaffirms a disturbing feeling. Jews are not safe anywhere.
Inevitable, too strong a word. Not surprised? I'm definitely not surprised.
Canadian Jewish leaders are repeating their calls for all levels of government to take decisive and immediate action, as they fear hate will lead to fatal consequences here at home. Vanessa Lee, CBC News, Montreal.
Breaking tonight, last-minute talks between Canada Post and its union have broken down without a deal, but the union has decided it won't go on a general strike, at least not yet. Instead, workers have been instructed to refuse overtime. That said, the union says it could take further action in the days ahead. So Nisha Patel has been watching these developments very closely. Nisha, can you take us through what both sides are saying tonight?
Adrian, it looks like there is a strike action, but it's quite different than the nationwide disruption we saw late last year. The union has called for an overtime ban effective 12 o'clock local time. So postal workers will refuse to work any more than 8 hours in a day and will refuse to work more than 40 hours in a week. Now, the union says it decided to proceed with an overtime ban to minimize disruptions to the public and avoid lost days for employees, but also warned that additional actions could still take place in the future if Canada Post changes anything to do with working conditions, benefits, or if it starts layoffs. So this action means workers will have to return to the depot and drop their mail off after 8 hours of work, regardless of whether they have completed their routes. And Adrian, the union adds that employees can't be disciplined for doing so.
Okay, and so the union is still reviewing the latest contract offers, I understand it. What were the sticking points?
Well, the two sides met briefly tonight for about half an hour at the request of the union, but Canada Post says it was not enough to demonstrate meaningful progress. Now, the Crown Corporation is offering workers a 13.5% pay bump over 4 years. It also wants to extend parcel delivery to the weekends by hiring more part-time staff. The union sees the proposal as an erosion of full-time jobs and says it's looking for a 19% raise to counter steep inflation. Now, in the background of all of this labor dispute is Canada Post's shaky financial situation. It's lost more than $3 billion since 2018, and some say postal reforms can't come fast enough.
But nevertheless, we need to rip the Band-Aid off and get on with the changes if we're going to have a hope of saving Canada Post as an entity in Canada.
And a federal commission said last week that Canada Post's business model is failing, and Adrian suggested that the Postal Service should phase out home delivery and close some post office locations if it wants to get back on its feet.
All right, Nisha Patel in Toronto. So the Prime Minister is now officially a member of Parliament after being sworn in.
I do swear.
I do swear
that I will be faithful.
that I will be faithful
and bear true allegiance.
and bear true allegiance
to His Majesty.
to His Majesty,
King Charles III.
King Charles III.
Mark Carney represents the Ottawa riding of Nepean. He received a special lapel pin worn by MPs for security access. Parliament returns on Monday, and Tuesday, King Charles will read the speech from the throne. Now, at issue, we'll preview what to expect in the throne speech, which lays out the government's priorities. That's in about 20 minutes. On Monday, King Charles arrives for his first visit to Canada as monarch. I'm hosting CBC News' special coverage, which begins at 12:30 Eastern, everywhere you stream CBC News. And then on Tuesday, the King delivers the speech from the throne. Our coverage begins at 9 a.m. Eastern, hosted by Rosemary Barton. Well, there's some stunning news for Harvard University tonight with a blow to its budget and perhaps its prestige. The Trump administration says Harvard can no longer enroll international students who make up more than a quarter of the student body. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson looks at the risk of losing access to the world's best.
Harvard is the dream school for many of the brightest young people around the world. But if the Trump administration has its way, that could come to an end, now banning the Ivy League school from enrolling international students.
Harvard brought these consequences upon themselves.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says it's a response to Harvard not fully complying with requests for information on all activities of its international students, specifically those involved in protests against the war in Gaza.
They have promoted and allowed violent activity on campus. They have allowed anti-Semitism, participation with CCP and Chinese infiltration and influence on their campus.
The new rule also affects more than 6,700 foreign students currently attending Harvard who would be forced to transfer to other schools. This includes hundreds of Canadians, some of whom told us they're afraid that speaking out may affect their immigration status.
We all came to this country because we love what it stands for.
This Swedish student is about to graduate.
It is heartbreaking. We are being used as poker chips right now in a battle between the White House and Harvard.
He says he won't pursue his graduate studies in the U.S. because the administration's wrath is not limited to Harvard. Columbia and Yale have also been targeted. This latest move sends a powerful message not just to Harvard, says this post-secondary education expert.
But I think the bigger message to domestic opponents of the Trump agenda is that we will use every means to intimidate you.
Harvard called the decision unlawful, and experts say they expect it to be challenged in court, which could make a difference. Just earlier in the day, a federal judge in California blocked the Trump administration from ending the legal status of international students. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
A fatal plane crash in San Diego is under investigation tonight. 6 people on board are presumed dead. The accident roused sleeping families, injured those on the ground, and sent a whole neighborhood into sudden panic. Philip Lishanuk shows us the damage.
A backyard surveillance camera caught the moment. The sky turning red as a small commuter jet crashed in the suburban San Diego neighborhood.
I heard an aircraft overturn and then an explosion.
Parked cars and homes burst into flames. With burning debris and jet fuel everywhere, extra firefighters had to be called in. The nighttime crash roused families into action.
Instantly, my mind went to, I have to get my family out of here. And whatever's going on, like my car, her car, everything that's inside the house, that's irrelevant. Just make sure everybody's safe.
By the light of day, the devastation was clear.
With the jet fuel going down the street and everything on fire all at once, it was pretty horrific to see.
About 100 people were evacuated from one of the largest military housing units in the world.
But no one was transported from the scene from any of the housing units. All the fatalities right now look to be that they're from the plane.
According to the Federal Aviation Administration, the Cessna Citation II had 6 people on board. And music executive Dave Shapiro, the owner of the plane and a licensed pilot, was one of the fatalities. It's not known if he was at the controls. The twin-engine corporate jet took off from a private airport in Teterboro, New Jersey, refueling in Wichita, Kansas, before flying towards San Diego. It crashed just across a highway from its destination.
Well, we know that
This former airline captain and aviation safety expert says weather conditions were likely a factor.
witnesses in the area report having little to no visibility, almost complete fog. So it's likely that the pilot did not see anything prior to the impact.
We do know the plane hit power lines before crashing, and the search is still on for its flight data recorder. Philip Lishanuk, CBC News, Toronto.
There was more dramatic testimony today in the trial of music mogul Sean Diddy Combs.
Combs was very angry, according to him and according to Cassie, about this relationship.
What rapper Kid Cudi told the court next. Plus, a major automaker puts the brakes on production of an electric vehicle in Canada.
There's no point in spending money building a factory to build a type of vehicle that aren't selling.
What it means for a sagging EV market. And later, after fighting over a nest, 2 bird moms find some common ground.
They both really were willing to put up with being annoyed and frustrated for the sake of caring for their babies.
How squabbling robins became one big happy family. We're back in 2. In New York, rapper Kid Cudi testified in the sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs. He described alleged threatening incidents during his relationship with Combs' ex-girlfriend. Magda Gabrisalasa takes us through his testimony.
Flanked by photographers, rapper Kid Cudi casually walked in to testify at Sean Diddy Combs' sex trafficking trial. The artist, whose legal name is Scott Mescudi, said he briefly dated Cassie Ventura in 2011, understanding that she and Combs had broken up. He testified that Combs didn't react well when he found out.
Combs was very angry, according to him and according to Cassie, about this relationship.
This reporter was in the courtroom as Mescudi talked about Combs breaking into his home and described his convertible Porsche being set ablaze weeks later with a Molotov cocktail.
Acts of violence and misconduct that prosecutors say tie into this larger decades-long scheme of violence to further his own personal means of control and abuse.
When the defense cross-examined Mescudi, he said there was no damage to his home and no direct link between Combs and the car fire. That's a win for the defense, says this legal analyst.
There was never an arrest, there was never a prosecution relating to that incident, and Cudi did say that he never actually saw who did it.
Mescudi also testified that Ventura told him about the physical abuse she endured. That topic was covered by other witnesses too. A makeup artist testified about hearing screaming, watching Combs leave a hotel room, and seeing Ventura with a swollen eye, busted lip, and knots on her head. George Kaplan, Combs' former executive assistant, testified that Combs would send him to pick up drugs. He also said he saw Combs being violent with Ventura and another girlfriend. There are still several more weeks in this trial. Combs is facing 5 charges, including racketeering and sex trafficking. He has pleaded not guilty. Magda Gabriel-Salasa, CBC News, Toronto.
There's more fallout tonight from Donald Trump's trade war affecting the auto industry with the delay in production of an electric vehicle model by Stellantis.
The only thing certain about this plan is uncertainty.
What the move could mean for workers in Canada. And after the break, Rosie's here with that issue.
Hey, Adrian, tonight we're going to talk about the Carney government's priorities outlined in its one mandate letter, and of course look ahead to the speech from the throne next week.
We will always be guided by our conviction that our economy is only strong when it serves everyone.
So what does the government's mandate letter tell us about its vision for Canada? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and more.
Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was named as the MVP for the NBA last night.
That was a special assembly today at the Hamilton, Ontario alma mater of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the NBA's recently crowned MVP. Gilgeous-Alexander won a city championship for Sir Alan McNabb as a grade 10 junior and a grade 11 senior. Now he joins basketball great Steve Nash as the only 2 Canadians ever named MVP of the NBA.
You know, you can only imagine and get excited about all the kids around the world, but in particular Canadians that will be affected so positively, whether they're basketball players or not, by the way he carries himself.
Gilgeous-Alexander led the NBA in scoring this season, making him the first Canadian ever to claim that title. Well, Stellantis says it has to postpone the production of a new Canadian-made electric vehicle, blaming Donald Trump's tariffs. Jennifer Lagrassa now with this latest setback for Canada's auto industry.
Stellantis is pulling back on its big electric vehicle bet. The automaker pausing production of its new 2026 EV Dodge Charger. Another potential blow for more than 4,000 workers at this Windsor, Ontario plant.
Every day you go in, you're guaranteed it's uncertain because we don't know what's going to happen.
Stellantis says the pause is the result of U.S. auto tariffs. It adds jobs won't be impacted, but the trade war has already hurt business here, including a 2-week-long closure in April.
We are positioned to take part in that.
And it's not just tariffs putting pressure on Canada's EV industry.
There's no point in spending money building a factory to build a type of vehicle that aren't selling. It just doesn't make sense.
The sector is taking a big hit at large. Just last week, Honda announced it's pausing a $15 billion investment in another Ontario EV project. One potential factor, the end of federal rebates for buying electric, says this expert.
You're going to see a dip immediately afterwards. It will go up again.
He says new incentives and a more competitive market would help. For example, easing tariffs on more affordable EVs made in China. And he says climate policy could become a global priority again.
When we're looking at what's happening in America in particular, we shouldn't think of it as indicative of the wider world, but rather an exception to it.
The new industry minister says Canada's looking at options, including bringing back EV rebate programs.
It is also important to make sure that Canadians are able to have access to affordable electric vehicles.
Stellantis has said it still intends to build the electric chargers, leaving workers to hope that this is simply a bump in the road. Jennifer Lagrassa, CBC News, Windsor, Ontario.
Now let's break down the news shaping our world. Rosie's here with that issue.
At issue tonight, government priorities. Mark Carney has penned one mandate letter for all of Cabinet, meant to focus the ministers on the tasks at hand.
This one letter outlines the core priorities of Canada's new government, reflecting the mandate that Canadians have given to us. In particular, the government is charged to build the strongest economy in the G7.
More of that message will come from King Charles next week when he delivers the speech from the throne. So what's to be made of the priorities in that one mandate letter? What can we expect from the throne speech next week? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it all down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. Good to see all three of you back together again, as it should be. Chantal, I'll start with you. We have seen mandate letters with the previous Prime Minister. This Prime Minister decided it would just be one, and everyone would be grouped under the one mandate letter. What does that tell you, and what did you make of what was in it?
Well, it is interesting in the sense that it feels more corporate than political, i.e. I read beyond the 7 priorities, is that what it is, to the every minister will be called over the next few months to tell the Prime Minister how he's contributing to making the shareholders happy. Which is an interesting way to read it. I can't pass judgment on whether this is a better way to focus the government, possibly, than going into all kinds of grocery lists. What I'll be looking for is the same focus in the throne speech.
Yeah.
Because if the throne speech is a grocery list, which it often is, and those mandate letters all speak about focus, I'm going to convince myself that there are 2 brains working in this government and they don't talk.
I don't know. I know some people like the mandate letters. I'm not sure how useful they were, given that you couldn't go through them and sort of tick off all the things ministers had done, Andrew. So they seem to be sort of more of a communications device. And in that case, perhaps one letter is all you need if you're Mark Carney.
Yeah, well, let me give the optimistic case with the proviso that, you know, we've been burned before, including by this Prime Minister. But the old mandate letters, the Justin Trudeau mandate letters, were very much a statement of power dominance of the Prime Minister. The ministers were basically his hired help, and he gave each of them a to-do list, and their job was basically just to do the things that the Prime Minister's office had told them to do. Not to bring forward their own ideas, to try to shape their own portfolios, but simply to respond to the demands of the Prime Minister's office. The optimistic reading of this would be, we have a set of priorities as a government. We have collective cabinet responsibility as a government for these priorities. But I would like to hear from you, within the ambit of your own responsibilities, what your contribution would be to that, what your ideas are for it. There's even a mention of real cabinet government. Again, we've been burned before. But on the surface of it, leaving aside that we've been burned before, the optics of it to me look better. They look more like cabinet government as we once knew it.
What do you make of it, Althea? Is it a sign of that, or is it a sign that Mark Carney has a clear direction for himself, maybe not his ministers?
I think the sign is that the government is not that organized and not that transparent. Mandate letters actually serve a very useful purpose to the running of government, as in they tell the public service, these are what your marching orders are. This is what the minister's focus will be. This is what we want you to work on. It tells stakeholders, this is what's important to the government. It tells the minister what his job or her job actually is. And I hear Andrew's point, and it is true. There is mention about, running a true cabinet government. But if you're a minister who doesn't fit in these 7 priorities, what exactly is your job? Like, there clearly could have been, these are the 7 priorities of the government, and these are the things that we ran on that are included in our platform that we would like you to implement. Or, they just had a long cabinet retreat and they talked about, they want to reduce government spending. They could have been a nod towards that. They could have been more transparent with Canadians about where they're going, and they've chosen not to be. So I think, if anything, this mandate letter is a communications document, but it is not a useful plan for anybody in the business of government at the moment, because it doesn't really tell you anything. It is too vague.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope behind closed doors at that cabinet retreat, people were sort of set, here's your job description in some way.
I don't know that happened.
Yeah. No. Okay, Chantal, yeah.
So I'm guessing, to be totally cynical, that if you can't find your way to contribute to those priorities, then you go to priority 7. That's the one that says about cutting
Spending
costs.
less.
Yes, and spending less. I mean, ministers for a long time have been told what to do. I agree with Andrew on this. And that's why I don't want to pass judgment on these mandate letters, because I think a more focused government, where the marching orders are to be filled in by each department, may be a good sign, but I don't know.
Well, let's
go ahead,
be
Andrew.
clear. Any government is basically remembered for maybe 2 things. So if you can get your priority list down to 7, you've made a good start on focusing in the way that will actually get results. I think the items on this list are not only what he ran on, but they're also, they help move the party to the center. Several of them are covering off weaknesses that the previous government had: housing, immigration, productivity, et cetera. And some of them are very much directed at the Trump threat and the challenge that presents. It's hard to quarrel with these as the main priorities of the government. And I'll just repeat, there's only so many things you're going to get done as a government anyway.
Yeah, Althea, you made a face there.
Well, 2 points. One, I think this actually sets up ministers fighting with each other because there's overlapping jurisdiction on a whole bunch of stuff. So, but setting that aside, to Andrew's point, yes. This reads exactly like, frankly, the conservative government that many in Poilievre's own caucus wish they probably could have voted for, because this is a very centrist, and I would even say center-right focused mandate letter, which is interesting because Mark Carney is the Prime Minister of Canada because a whole bunch of progressives voted for him, and their issues in the way that we have typically understood them to be verbalized by the Liberal government were not part of his speech and are not part of this mandate letter.
How much?
Okay,
so Chantal, go
I
ahead,
didn't make a face, but I would argue that these poor progressive.
I'm going to start making faces.
Yes, I used my pen.
Yeah, use your pen. Yeah.
These poor progressive voters voted with their eyes wide open. They were not promised the Justin Trudeau repeat.
Yeah.
So maybe they won't like it. That's another issue. But at this point, that is what they voted for.
I don't disagree with that.
Okay, Andrew, last word to you, though you made no face.
Althea and Chantal are both right, which is to say, Carney basically ran, you could project onto him what you wanted to see. So center-right voters, there were lots of conservatives I talked to who said, I've never voted Liberal before, but I'll vote for this guy. You had NDPers voting for him because they thought he'd be in more progressive government. And when you can get into that sweet spot, at least for the duration of election campaign, But this is when you start to define yourself, and he has the advantage that the NDP is flat on its back. So he's got a period now when you can actually go after center-right voters and try and cement a broader coalition than the one that got him into power.
But if he's not careful, the NDP might rise up.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's right. And so the throne speech will be something to watch, delivered in
Sorry,
a lovely British accent. Yeah. Okay, thank you. We're going to leave that part there. When we come back, we'll take a look at how Canada is realigning its position on the world stage.
Canada has what the world needs and the values the world respects.
From taking a role in support of Ukraine to bilateral meetings with European leaders last weekend, how is Canada's role in global politics changing? That's next. At issue, Canada on the world stage. The Prime Minister is pushing for Canada to become a global leader and strengthen other alliances when possible, while also addressing the changing dynamic with the U.S.
We are in a position now where we cooperate when necessary, but not necessarily cooperate. So we have other options for that cooperation. We are pursuing those other options. You will see a very different set of partnerships, security and economic, going forward.
So here to break down how the Prime Minister is preparing or trying to do that realignment, Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. I thought that clip there from his press conference was quite telling because it sort of clarifies what he's been trying to do since he became prime minister, even before the election. And we saw that again this week with this decision to go with the United Kingdom and France to speak about what was happening in the Middle East and to call on Israel to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. So, Althea, what do you make of what the prime minister is trying to do here and how he's doing it in terms of who he's speaking with and who he's trying to align himself with?
I'm going to uncouple the two things, I think. Sure. I think on the American front, he's frankly acting like any Canadian prime minister would. You don't want the Americans to be building something over us, or potentially over us, that we have no decision-making ability and no participation in, and we're just a sacrificial lamb, perhaps, in America's security. So that, I think, is like any conservative prime minister, liberal prime minister, the Golden Dome, that would have happened regardless. Well, the one thing that we're seeing is, frankly, Mark Carney is introducing himself on the world stage because he doesn't know these individuals. So it's natural that he would want to build bridges, build relationships with people. So that fits like you would expect a new prime minister to do that. I think the difference on the Gaza front is that, frankly, the Liberals got a bit of a wake-up call in the last election. You know, they lost one seat, Yara Sachs' seat, because of the Jewish vote that migrated to the Conservatives, and they lost I mean, we don't know yet exactly because all the deep dives haven't actually happened, but a lot of MPs believe that they lost part of their Muslim vote, in part because of what was happening in Gaza, and that the government wasn't very good at communicating what it actually was doing in Gaza in terms of the aid that was going, and felt that the government needed to take a more public stance. And you saw the Liberal government under Justin Trudeau kind of move in that direction. I think what you're seeing now is that there's not just the Liberal voter base, but frankly, a lot of Canadians, regardless of what religious background you have, you're seeing, you know, humanity suffering, and whatever religion you are, you're human first. And I think that is what you are seeing the government respond to. And I think you're going to frankly see more of it.
Yeah, but it was interesting to see, you know, put aside the issue itself, but the decision to, you know, for Canada to go with France and the United Kingdom and to continue to be, or trying to be, a forceful presence in this coalition of the willing, Andrew. Like there is something happening here that Canadians need to be aware of.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it adds up to at this point.
No,
I think
for
these
sure.
are pretty mixed bag of decisions.
Yeah.
Althea said it was what any previous government would have done to get involved with the ballistic missile defense. Well, the last time it came up under Paul Martin, they decided to stay out of it. And frankly, I would be more comfortable with being involved in something that was under George Bush Jr. than under Donald Trump. So I'm not against the principle of missile defense, but the execution of it and the people in charge of it give one pause. So the fact that the government's even willing to go near it is interesting, shall we say. The decision on, or the statement on Gaza, to me, was pretty much in line with the Justin Trudeau government. And look, nobody would be saying that Israel's above criticism, but the government of either Trudeau or Mark Carney would be in a better place to offer criticism if it had shown a clearer sign of understanding that Israel does indeed have a right to defend itself, and the right to defend itself extends to waging war on its enemies. And that Hamas bears responsibility not only for the war, but for the continuation of the war, since it refuses to surrender or to lay down its arms. So it's not to say that Israel is above criticism, but the government, as I say, has not established a great track record to be in a position to offer constructive criticism. Beyond that, I think he's just laying down markers on Ukraine, of course, very solid. But I think it's also just behooves him to be out making connections, displaying those connections to the public. Yeah. This is obviously a strong suit for him personally, is that he's got a Rolodex as long as your arm, and people will take his calls, and he's treated with respect in international circles.
But just to go back to what he actually said, right? We will cooperate when we see opportunities to cooperate with the United States, but if not, then we will have other places. And that to me seems fundamentally sort of what he's trying to lay the groundwork for there. Yeah, Chantal?
Oh yeah, maybe so. He also said that it wasn't automatic anymore that Canada would line up with the U.S. on defense. Well, but the thing is, it did not. The ballistic missile shield, they call it golden or whatever color you want, was rejected by previous governments. Mm-hmm. Yep. So I'm reading this, and it does not jive with the we're picking and choosing, because we're at this point going with this proposal. which will be debated to death if it goes through. I figure that the reason why Mark Carney went there is not so much that he believes we should have a golden shield over us, but that it is not for Canada to be the country that says, we're not playing in your movie, it's a stupid idea. That the cost, for 40 years, Canada has said no to this, and still the U.S. is not under a shield that we're not under.
Yeah.
So why would this time be different? I also note that on the other issue, and on the larger scale, Mr. Carney tends to line up with France and the UK, which plays well in Canada, because the UK and France speak to both main language groups in this country, and it's an alignment that tends to get a pass from Canadians, regardless of the issue.
Yeah, and that's what he did on that first trip, right, before the election, was talking about the founding peoples to try and signal that. I mean, maybe he doesn't think that Golden Dome's even going to happen, given what Chantal has said there.
It may be that he's storing up some credit that he may not even have to use to give him some room on decisions like the F-35, for example. Which is going to be a really, really tough one. If the consensus is that they don't want to continue with the whole purchase through the F-35, but to get a European fighter jet, that's going to be really hard to stick on with the Americans.
It's also, remember, he went and the Prime Minister went and purchased that Australian over-the-horizon radar system for Canada's north. So he has also made moves in a different direction for Canada's sovereignty there. Althea?
Actually, I was going to mention those two things. Yeah. But I also think, like, the geopolitical situation, and I don't want to say, I don't want to add against my argument, but Erin O'Toole also suggested this and was poo-pooed in the last election. But I think things have changed. I think the risks that we understand towards the Americans and towards us have changed, and so I think that conversation has changed. But the most important thing, I think, on the moving away from the U.S. is on the F-35 decision. Because then when he's talking about we're going to, so much money, like what did he say, 75% of our defense spending goes to the Americans, if we're uncoupling that money, that's far more significant in terms of something long-term than trying to appease the orange man down south for the remainder of his term on something that's probably not going to get done while he's still president.
Okay. Got to leave it there. Thank you all for that. That is that issue on the National anyway. We're going to continue the conversation and talk about Liberal MPs talking about the Reform Act. We'll see whether they vote on it on Sunday. You can catch that on YouTube and the At Issue podcast. Now back to Adrienne in Toronto.
Thanks, Rosie. Coming up, in Ontario, woman discovers an unusual dynamic in a robin's nest.
They both really were willing to put up with being annoyed for the sake of caring for their babies.
How two robin moms formed an unlikely friendship in a crowded nest. That is next in our moment. You're looking at a close-up view of a robin's nest at the home of St. Thomas, Ontario's Deborah Copeland. She and her family have been documenting the nest for weeks. So Deborah is used to seeing a robin's nest on her front porch. That's why the camera's there. But this year she noticed things were getting unusual. So she set up that camera to find out what was really going on, and her discovery makes our moment.
This year I noticed the nest being constructed, and so I started checking for eggs. I found 8 eggs, which completely shocked me because robins never lay 8 eggs. That night, I saw 2 female robins snuggled up on the nest together. All robins are very territorial of their space. So they were just pecking at each other, biting each other, but kind of resigned to the fact that the other one wasn't going to leave. They both were willing to put up with being annoyed for the sake of caring for their babies. And then they really started to just chill out. We started to see at least one dad, and the first time he came up there and saw how many eggs there were, you could see him have this crisis, what am I looking at? Sometimes there's 3 birds up there feeding the babies, sometimes 2, sometimes 1. Seeing them become friends, they've bonded in some way. And to me, that relationship, it takes a village kind of thing, that's been my favorite.
I think I could stream that feed all day long. First thing is, seems like the hatchlings are doing pretty well. There's a lot to count, but she thinks they're okay. She's asked a few experts, like, well, what is happening here? And the suggestion that she's been given is that maybe it's a real estate crunch, that one nest collapsed, so they had to share. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime, on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.